This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. The first U.S. space shuttle mission of 1989 is up in orbit and down to business. The Discovery crew of 5 blasted off to begin a 5-day mission. The mission started with deployment of an important NASA communications satellite link. This after 3 weeks of technical delays and this morning's iffy winds and weather at the launch pad. CBS News correspondent Peter Van Sant reports on Discovery's rise and shine above the fog and wind.
We look like we had a good deploy on time. Everything looks good at the moment.
Just 6 hours into their space flight, Discovery's astronauts accomplished their #1 mission, the release of a $100 million satellite called TDRS, which will improve communication between spacecraft and Earth.
Rather than having to rely on intermittent contact through ground stations, with this satellite, the shuttle will be in contact with the ground over 90% of the time.
The deployment of TDRS topped off a day that began in a fog. Discovery was grounded in the mist for almost 2 hours, with only its launch status up in the air.
Still monitoring the fog conditions here at Kennedy.
But the sun eventually burned the fog away, and Discovery rode the flame into space.
3, 2, 1, SRB ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of STS-29 as Discovery clears the tower.
I would consider it a good start for the year. This is going to be a long launch season, and we're going to need more of these.
All systems clean as a whistle, no reports in mission control of any systems anomalies.
Discovery is the first of 7 shuttle flights planned for this year. Today's launch boosted confidence within NASA, an agency which critics say has set an unrealistic schedule.
I don't think any of us had any real doubts about it, but it's true you have to prove it to yourself that you can do it.
An example of NASA's more ambitious scheduling, while Discovery climbed into orbit, engineers were already preparing the shuttle Atlantis for another mission next month.
What they have to prove this year is that they have an operational system that can get off flights regularly and deliver significant payloads to space.
I think it's going to be a couple of years before we get the flight rate up, before we can really tell, can we handle the total workload.
NASA workers have already begun preparing Discovery's launch pad for the shuttle Atlantis, which is slated for liftoff on April 28th. NASA hopes to eventually double its yearly shuttle missions to 14, a lofty goal that critics say is out of this world. Peter Van Sant, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
With so many U.S. defense policy decisions still on hold after the long, acrimonious John Tower nomination battle, the Senate Armed Services Committee opens confirmation hearings tomorrow on Congressman Richard Cheney, President Bush's second choice for Defense Secretary. Already, there is a major new battle brewing inside the Pentagon over building, deploying, and paying for Star Wars missile defense technology. CBS News Defense Department correspondent David Martin has an exclusive report.
An internal Pentagon memorandum claims an initial Star Wars defense against Soviet missiles can be deployed for $25 billion starting within 5 years. That is dramatically faster and cheaper than previous Pentagon estimates, which have put the cost of the first phase of a Star Wars defense, an elaborate system of space-based satellites and rockets, at $69 billion. This new estimate was made by Lieutenant General James Abramson, former head of the Star Wars program, in a departing report to his superiors last month.
That's an extraordinary memo. In it, General Abramson tells us that he's going to develop a whole new technology and do it for $25 billion, do it in 2 years, be ready to produce it and deploy it in 3 more years.
Abramson cites a new technology called Brilliant Pebbles, thousands of rockets like this based in space and able to detect and destroy Soviet missiles on their own. Abramson claims a Brilliant Pebbles defense would be cheaper than some of the offensive systems, the Midget Man missile and the stealth bomber, for instance, now under consideration. Abramson's claim is likely to be hotly disputed.
Nothing I've ever seen come out of any high-technology defense project encourages me to believe that this one can be done for $25 billion when we don't even have the technology in hand.
Dan, this memo is going to have a major impact on the Bush administration's review of defense strategy, which is scheduled to be completed next month.
David, why is this memo coming out just now?
We should point out that this memo was leaked, if that's the right word, by a pro-Star Wars group, and obviously anything that shows that Star Wars can be built for much, much less than previous estimates is only going to help its case when it's up for grabs in this current budget debate.
David Martin, thanks. President Bush's administration opened its first high-level talks with Israel today and put forward its first modest ideas for trying to advance Middle East peace processes. White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews is following these talks in Washington.
President Bush's first Middle East peace initiative began today with a new level of pressure on Israel. The President and Secretary of State Baker told Foreign Minister Moshe Aarons they want Israel to relax its grip on the occupied territories as part of an overall plan to get Israel and the PLO into peace talks.
We considered various reinforcing and reciprocal steps which might be taken to diffuse the tensions there.
In the discussions that we had today, I was not asked to make any changes. We discussed various options.
The options to be considered include asking Israel to cut back sharply on the number of Palestinians in detention and to reopen schools in the occupied territories. The administration hopes to propose to the PLO that it respond by stopping violent demonstrations in the territories and ending all Palestinian commando raids launched from southern Lebanon.
That on the one side, we hope that Israelis will take the initiative. On the other side, we hope that the PLO will respond. And the process is designed to test the PLO's peaceful intentions.
The administration would test whether Yasser Arafat can or will stop the kind of cross-border raid that happened once again today. 3 Palestinian commandos crossing from Lebanon shot and killed by Israeli soldiers. Raids like this make the Israelis ask, why talk to Palestinians at all?
As we know, it's unfortunately not the last time that a group will try to penetrate the border. What we have to do here is to stop them.
And Palestinians are asking, what's in the administration plan for them? In effect, the plan calls for an end to the uprising, the only real leverage they have.
But it is very difficult to ask us to stop the intifada while we are waiting for a final shape of the peace process to come through.
Perhaps the strongest signal the Bush White House intended to send today is that it is serious about the dialogue with the PLO. Today, the question is not whether Israel should talk to the PLO, but how to devise a strategy to make the PLO acceptable. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, the White House.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News, correspondent John Blackstone on the latest emergency in emergency rooms because of assault weapons. And Richard Schlesinger on working women and the controversial new notion of, quote, the mommy trap. Settlement in New York today in an unprecedented case, the case of the U.S. government's attempt to use racketeering laws to oust the leaders of the nation's largest union, the Teamsters, and put the government in control. CBS News correspondent Harold Dow has our report.
It was to be a judicial battle royal, the United States government versus the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. But at this court today, word of a truce, a tentative settlement.
With this agreement, the government has the tools to clean up this union and return control to rank-and-file membership.
The government had accused the 1.6 million member union of pervasive corruption and mafia involvement in its highest ranks. And it proposed for the first time ever to take control of a union in order to steer it on a straight course. But the terms of today's proposal call for no resignations by Teamsters and no direct government control. Instead, the settlement calls for the formation of a 3-member panel chosen jointly by the union and the government. Its purpose? To investigate possible corruption within the union, to hear cases brought by investigators, and to review election practices to ensure fair elections at the next Teamsters Convention in 1991.
Basically, it does provide for a one-member, one-vote election system within our union, which is what we want.
Some members had mixed views about what today's announcement says about their union.
I think it says what most people have known all along, and it has syndicate or mafia ties. Everybody knows it.
And what it says about the government's case.
It says that it's very weak and that what they started, they couldn't finish.
One expert agreed with that sentiment.
If the union is as corrupt as the government said it was when it filed the case, those are the people who were and are responsible for the corruption. If it's not that corrupt, and I think it is, then what did they file the lawsuit for in the first place?
The proposed settlement is still subject to approval by U.S. District Judge David Edelstein. He said the 30-page document is so complicated he needs time to study it. His ruling is expected tomorrow. Dan?
Cheryl, thanks. On this 10th day of a strike by its machinists union, Eastern Airlines added some overseas and domestic flights to its schedule, but all except a handful of pilots continued to honor the machinist picket lines. And hundreds of bargain-hunting travelers lived what one called a nightmare of nightmares. Mark Phillips has our report.
Eastern says it's putting 100 flights into the air today, trying to reestablish 10% of its pre-strike schedule. The pilots say that even with the operation of some service to Latin America, the airline is only managing about 3.5%. And the arguments are about to move back into the same court where Eastern petitioned for bankruptcy last week. CBS News has learned that the pilots' union plans to go to bankruptcy court itself this week to petition that Eastern be taken out of the hands of Frank Lorenzo and Texas Air Corp and be placed with a trustee. Even if the move isn't successful, it's another way of turning up the heat in a dispute that is already at the boiling point. The pilots have one dominant strategy: to continue the squeeze on the entire Frank Lorenzo empire.
To put economic pressure not only on Eastern, but on Texas Air and Continental to, in fact, either settle it or sell it.
Eastern is still trying to entice pilots to cross the striking machinist picket line, putting forth examples of the relative few who have.
I have never yet received a paycheck from the union, and I have received every paycheck for 26 years from Eastern Airlines.
Well, I think they're going to start running out of time on their existing crews very quickly. They're obviously flying them to their maximum every day.
Some of Eastern's flights may be in the air, but some of its passengers remained on the ground all night. The $12 bargain basement weekend shuttle drew more traffic than it could handle.
Unfortunately, the passengers don't see the issue. The passengers are looking for a seat. They're looking for a low price. Beyond that, they don't care.
The issue remains the future of the airline, which is hanging in the balance as both sides refuse to back down. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Miami.
The Food and Drug Administration today said it has found traces of cyanide in some seedless red grapes from Chile. CBS News medical correspondent Susan Spencer is standing by in our Washington newsroom to tell us what we need to know about this possibly important story. Susan?
Dan, that development came within the hour. The FDA characterizes this as one of the biggest recalls in history. As you said, they found traces, and they emphasized traces of cyanide in seedless red grapes from Chile. But because they found cyanide in any product from Chile, they have decided to include in the recall all fruit that comes from Chile. That is one of the reasons why this is so large. They stressed that the levels of cyanide that were found are not enough even to sicken a child. On the other hand, it is more than would be found naturally. Consumers are urged, obviously, not to eat any fruit from Chile, and they stress, the FDA does, that most of the red grapes that come into this country are from Chile. Ironically, this followed a statement from the FDA last week that it had an anonymous call threatening poisoning of fruit from Chile, but that they had discounted this. After that happened, they did find cyanide in grapes that had left Chile before that call came in. So anyone with any seedless red grapes from Chile should certainly have nothing to do with them. Dan?
Thank you, Susan. And we'll keep our eyes on this story if it grows bigger than people now think it is. Ruling party tonight voted unanimously to back party leader Frederick de Klerk in his bid to replace President P.M. Botha. A party resolution asked Botha to help in the transfer of power to de Klerk. The ailing 73-year-old Botha has been defying appeals to resign. He's been recovering from a stroke since January, but he insists that he will go back to work this week and stay in office at least until next year. The siege of Jalalabad went into its second week today. U.S.-backed Afghan rebels are desperately trying to seize the city to give themselves a military and political base in their struggle to overthrow the Soviet-backed communist regime. But the government forces are equally desperate in holding on. And as correspondent Alan Pizzi reports tonight, the battle has generated a whole new flood of refugees.
The fighting around Jalalabad is being called the bloodiest of the 10-year war. Both sides claim to be winning. There is no doubt who is losing. Refugees fleeing the fighting around Jalalabad airport have been arriving in Pakistan at the rate of nearly 1,000 a day. Refugee officials here had hoped that the battle for Jalalabad would result in a liberated area refugees could head towards, not flee.
There is heavy bombardment, and the refugees are in search of security. So they are running towards this border, toward Pakistan.
The camps here are already bursting with more than 3 million Afghan refugees, and the authorities are trying to encourage new victims of the war not to cross the border. But getting them food and shelter is a problem. An American aid agency put together a $12,000 shipment within 24 hours, but it's a token at best. And then there are those who cannot be left in Afghanistan. Casualties are thought to number in the thousands. This small hospital has been filled for days. The pain is borne with an almost defiant indifference. Before, we had wounds from mines, said one man, but bullets are no problem. There are no Purple Hearts here, just a quick convalescence and back to the front. And for every refugee who escapes those front lines, there are hundreds, perhaps thousands more still trapped and likely to flee here if they can. The Pakistani authorities and many of the refugees had hoped the battle for Jalalabad would provide them with a solution. Instead, it seems to be worsening their problem. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Peshawar, Pakistan.
And enjoying yourself. That's what life is all about. And it's easy when you have the best bladder control protection. Depend Undergarments has special layers of absorbency that won't bunch or sag, and elastic legs for a better fit. They're the best protection and the best way for you to get back into life. Hey!
Get back into life with Depend.
Tickets for Webb.
We interrupt this purchase for a reminder.
Here we go.
There's another decision worth entertaining.
Very smart.
Choosing the card that actually pays you cash. Cash back for every charge. The Discover card.
I'm starved.
It pays to Discover, the card that pays you back.
This year, even if you have to pay money to the government, there's still a way you can get money back. From Subaru.
Up to $1,500 back or 4.9 financing on a Subaru.
Where does it hurt?
Here.
For heartburn and gas, your medical answer is Extra Strength Malox Plus. Its doctor-recommended formula neutralizes more than any leading antacid. Ask your doctor about Extra Strength Malox Plus.
The California State Assembly today passed legislation that would ban the sale of assault weapons such as the AK-47 used in the January Stockton, California schoolyard slaughter that claimed 5 young lives. John Blackstone reports those weapons inflict wounds that are straining hospital resources and costing taxpayers all across the country big money.
Okay, here we've got about a 35-year-old male. He's got 4 GSWs, 1 to the...
GSW, emergency room shorthand for gunshot wound. The man was shot 4 times, the woman twice. For the trauma team at Highland Hospital in Oakland, this is painfully familiar work, patching up damage inflicted by semi-automatic assault weapons.
400 don't do that.
A third man in the same shooting was luckier. A bullet just grazed his head.
It sounded like somebody took a pack of firecrackers and threw them.
As we get better at taking care of patients, the weaponry gets better at destroying patients, and we've sort of leveled off to a certain extent with what can be achieved with medical progress.
One bullet just hitting that has splintered probably the strongest bone in the body into 20 or 30 pieces here. And so if you get shot in the middle of the stomach, well, you have to worry about the heart and the lungs and the liver and the diaphragm and the kidneys.
Some nights, this emergency room is so busy treating gunshot wounds, there are no beds and not enough blood to treat victims of car accidents. They have to be sent to hospitals farther away. Victims of assault weapons often need the most expensive treatment of anyone who is rushed into this emergency room.
His hospital bill will probably be at least $30,000 to $50,000 if there's no complications and he does not require any major surgery.
GSW to the ankle. At this time, vitals are stable. We have
But hospitals almost never get paid for treating gunshot victims. 85% of those shot don't have health insurance and are too poor to pay. It's a major reason Highlands Trauma Center loses about $8 million a year. Highland Hospital serves an unusually violent urban area, but across the country, everyone is paying for the treatment of gunshot victims. One study estimates the cost to American taxpayers at more than $1 billion a year.
In addition, we looked just at economic costs. For each dollar that we found, there was a huge amount of pain and suffering that we couldn't measure in any way.
Just one bullet right there.
Doctors are prominent in the current campaign against assault weapons. For them, gunshot wounds are a preventable injury, and gun control is preventive medicine. John Blackstone, CBS News, Oakland.
Former Education Secretary William Bennett officially took office today as the nation's first Director of National Drug Policy Control, the so-called anti-drug czar created by Congress. Bennett said he'd begin by concentrating on the drug-plagued violence that has killed 107 so far this year right in the nation's capital. Some in Congress complain President Bush has already sent the wrong signal by declining to make Bennett a sitting member of his cabinet. Bennett has no law enforcement experience. He is expected to name a deputy from law enforcement possibly within a few days.
Lucky for this diver, he has a thin, powerful seal. So thin it's virtually airtight. So powerful it even holds up to pressure. No, it's not on this diver's mask. The seal is on his dentures. Extra Hold Fast Teeth has a seal so thin yet so powerful, it's virtually airtight. For a hold that's closer to real than any ordinary adhesive, Extra Hold Fast Teeth, the Extra Hold seal that's closer to real.
Fast Track or Mommy Track? A business school magazine says that's the choice organizations should offer women. Correspondent Richard Schlesinger explains why this proposal is raising temperatures and consciousness in boardrooms all across the country.
For a generation, the gospel of the women's movement has been equal pay for equal work and equal chance for promotion. Now, a businesswoman who calls herself a feminist is saying all things are not equal in the workplace. It's the women who have babies, and some might need what has come to be called the mommy track.
We've had the growing awareness of the cost of employing women, and it is more.
More, says Schwartz, because often just when women are advancing up the corporate ladder, they have babies.
They go through pregnancy, they go through a period of disability, they are, thank goodness, nursing their babies these days. This takes time, and it's a distraction from work.
And Schwartz argues in the Harvard Business Review that women who want children are willing to trade higher pay and promotions for flexible hours. The idea of a mommy track has infuriated feminists.
What is all of this? And I think one more time, it just gives people an excuse for treating women differently and giving them lesser pay and the whole 9 yards.
Women must not be asked to pay the price of a permanent second-class sexual ghetto, which is what this proposal for a mommy track is.
But Schwartz says companies frequently make it so difficult for managers who become mothers that many women prefer to quit. That, she says, is a waste of talent, and going on the mommy track is a way to keep a valuable woman, even if the corporation is no longer her only priority.
You still don't know what kind of disclosure.
It works for Deborah Tuckman, an attorney at one of New York's blue ribbon law firms. With 17-month-old twins at home, working part-time was the only way she could stay on the job.
This has given me an option that really wasn't available before, and I'm grateful for the option.
Susan Frenier is an executive in a brokerage house. She is also the mother of an 11-month-old boy. She's back working full-time and wants no part of the mommy track.
My self-worth is associated with my career and my salary and the interrelationships and the appreciation I get from the other professionals that I work with. And I can't walk away from that, and I'm still very motivated by that.
Like it or not, says Felice Schwartz, there are a lot of women who disagree with Susan Frenier. And if companies don't set up mommy tracks, millions of women will see their careers needlessly derailed. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, New York.
And that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. See you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, Lech Wałęsa from Poland and Israeli Foreign Minister Moshe Eretz.
Plus, Sybil Shepherd joins us tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.